Hi everyone, it's Will with the 1921 Diary Series, and we have a special diary entry today, I think, that tells us a lot and brings up some interesting topics. And unfortunately, poor Dimitri is still very depressed and thinking of himself along the lines of the lishny человек, the superfluous man, leading a kind of aimless and pointless existence. And I just found the other day my old copy of the novel Oblomov, which is so old that it's in English. I actually read this book originally before I was even able to read Russian. And there's also a good Soviet-era movie version of it. But this is one of the important novels, 19th century novels in Russia, about this whole idea of the lishny человек, the man who does not see himself as having a future or any outlet for his talents and his aspirations. So Dmitri was not completely an Oblomov type. So there were two types, as we've talked before, of the lishny человек. One was the fellow who made no effort and never even got out of his dressing gown or got off his couch. So Dmitri wasn't that type. Not at all, actually. I shouldn't say he wasn't completely that type, but he was the type to, because he made efforts, but his efforts always either backfired or just didn't go anywhere, and so he would become depressed, and he would have that unhappy view of life as feeling like, well, I am superfluous. So I don't want to go further on about that. So yeah, let's dive in. So it is the 9th of January, 1921 on the old calendar, and it is the 27th of January, 1921 on the new calendar. So in France, the date was 27th January, but Dmitri was keeping his old habit of looking at the date primarily as being what it would have been in pre-revolutionary Russia, which was the 9th January. And at any rate, on both calendars, it is a Sunday, and it's Paris. And once again, he gives us he gives us his address, 76 Rue Miro-Mesnil, for whatever reason. So here's the diary entry. I did some writing in the morning, and around 12 o'clock went to church. There was a memorial service for Papa and Bodya. His birthday is today. I had lunch at Maria's. Mamichka and the little girls were there. Around 3:30, I went to the Travelers. Then I walked to the Ritz to see the Witchfelds. I dined that day at the Crisavalonis. Leonardi came for a little party, but I quickly left, and Maria was terribly offended. I went to Ciro with Pete and Luders. And Luders was there with some girls. Germaine, Neris, Gugu, and one other. After Ciro, we dropped by the Clover Club for a minute because Fisher is performing there, and then we went to Germaine's house. Her place has the most astonishing rooms. They're arranged and decorated in an Indian/Chinese style. Taken together, they resemble a blank. There we lay around on divans and indulged in all kinds of nonsense until 2 a.m. Overall, it was boring and pointless. Okay, so we have lots to talk about here. So he's going to church at 12 o'clock. It is a Sunday. So what does it mean that he's going at 12 o'clock? Well, it means he decided to skip the liturgy, which typically would start around 9:30 or 10 o'clock. That seems to be fairly universal across the boards with Orthodox liturgy. And so he's skipping it, because memorial services, typically in the Russian Orthodox Church, they can be held separately, but typically they are served immediately following the liturgy on Sunday. And so after the liturgy ended, then the memorial service would start. And so he, instead of going to liturgy, he just goes for the memorial service afterwards. And the memorial service is for both Papa and Bodya, but it's Bodya's birthday. So Papa being Grand Duke Paul Alexandrovich Pavel, and Bodya being Dimitri's little half-brother, Prince Vladimir Paley. And I'm almost certain that Bodya was probably what little Vladimir called himself when he was tiny and couldn't pronounce the standard Russian nickname for Vladimir, which is Volodya. So you can imagine this little guy trying to say Volodya and calling himself Bodya. And it's one of those instances where a baby name stuck, and that was what he was called within the family for the rest of his life. And alas, it was a short life. Okay, so I have some pictures from him of him and his sisters, and I thought the sisters, whom Dmitri here refers to as the little girls, I thought they really were little. So it's long overdue that I actually looked them up. And I've got some fantastic pictures here, and these pictures were found by so you have the French historian Jacques Ferrand, and this is his book on Grand Duke Paul, and he was able to connect with the children and grandchildren of Dimitri's half-siblings and to get some of these really fantastic photographs. So here's a photograph. You have Grand Duke Paul in the middle, you have Princess Paley on the side, and you have her children from her previous marriage, and you have there's Bodya, and there's the little girls. So don't get angry at me for saying it, but I laugh when I see this picture because they look like those two little girls in The Shining, in the movie by Stanley Kubrick. And here's another photo of them. So Paul isn't in this one. This one is just the children. These are Princess Paley's children, 3 from her first marriage, and then Bodya and Irina and Natalia from her marriage with Grand Duke Paul. And you can see that Bodya is a handsome boy like his big brother. And this uniform is from the Corps de Page, so the school that the most aristocratic families in Russia sent their children to that school. And so it's 1911. Paul and Olga have not returned to live in Russia, but they've sent their son Bodya to the Corps de Page there. All right, so Dmitri does not talk about Bodya. Bodya was 6 years younger than him, so not very much. And Maria, in her memoirs, says that she and Dmitri had discovered the existence of Bodya by seeing a photograph of him on their father's desk in his study in St. Petersburg, and asking him, well, who is this little boy? Why do you have his picture on your desk? And I can't remember what he told them initially. She also, says what she said to them, but what he said to them. But anyway, Dmitri doesn't talk about him. My impression is that Dmitri didn't want to have anything to do with him, because it was so sort of traumatic for him to find out about his father's second family, and in particular this boy who was dad's boy, in the sense that Bodya got to live with Paul, and Bodya had exactly the warm family life with mom and dad that Dmitri always wanted. Bodya got that and not him. And so I think that's why. So even when Dmitri finds out about Bodya's death and how horrific it was, he was killed by the Bolsheviks, he was thrown into a mine pit along with Aunt Ella, Tiotia Ella, who we're getting to know from the 1906 diaries, and some other Romanov relations, and they were then shot at, and then just left. Whether there was no attempt to verify whether they were actually dead or not, and they were just left, and the mine shaft was covered up or filled in at some point, and yeah, horrible, horrible. But when Dmitri finds out about that, he just has nothing to say about Bodya. And yeah, that's kind of, yeah, it's sad. But people are where they are at given points in their life. And from an intellectual standpoint, we can certainly understand it. So once again, he is not saying anything about Bodya. Maria, on the other hand, really adored her little half-brother. Once the kids got over the whole thing of looking at their stepmother as an absolute monster, Maria connected with her little brother, and he was considered very talented. He was 21 by the time he died, but he had already published some volumes of poetry and done some translations and written some plays. And here is what Maria writes about him in her memoirs. Volodya was an extraordinary being, a living instrument of rare sensitiveness, which could of itself produce sounds of startling melody and purity and create a world of bright images and harmonies. He confirmed the theory that exceptional children are born of a great and exceptional love. When he was still a baby, there was something indefinable about him that set him apart from the others. When he was a child, in fact, I considered him a nuisance, affected and priggish. But later I understood that he was a being older than his years, lost in the milieu to which his age assigned him. His parents saw how different he was from the others and wisely did not try to shape him according to pattern as had been done with us. They allowed him comparative freedom to develop his unusual abilities. While still a child, he wrote good verse and very fine plays to be acted by his small sisters. He played the piano, he painted, and at a very early age astounded people by his extensive reading and his extraordinary memory. So this was exactly the person that poor Dmitri wanted to be. Now, Dmitri was very smart. He was very smart, and his intelligence was overlooked, unfortunately, and not always appreciated. I think both he and Marie were smarter than the people taking care of them, than George Mikhailovich, whom I hope will forgive me if he's looking down somewhere, and Miss June. And I don't know that that was appreciated, that people kind of saw them the way Maria is describing the way she saw her little half-brother, as being sort of priggish and, what does she say? Affected and priggish. And yeah, maybe they weren't affected and priggish. Maybe sometimes they were, but their intelligence was not fostered. Their talents were not fostered. And as you can tell by the very eloquent and poetic way that Maria is writing in her memoirs, and by the poetic phrasing that Dmitri is using himself in his diaries that he doesn't expect anyone to read and praise him for. As you can tell, this literary talent ran in the family. And so, how difficult that must have been for Dmitri to have this little brother that everybody looked at and said, well, he's a genius, he's an extraordinary talent, and made a fuss over, and Uncle Kostya, Konstantin Konstantinovich, made a fuss over Bodya because Uncle Kostya was also a literary person, and Vladimir actually translated one of Uncle Kostya's plays into French, and Dmitri felt like people did not get him, and certainly that his father and the other people didn't get him, who had raised him, and they just, as Maria says, we were pushed into particular roles. Well, part of that was that they were a Grand Duke and a Grand Duchess, and Olga and Paul could enjoy their son without having to prepare him for any such position. You know, he would be freer to find his own path in life. If that was a literary path, he could pursue it. He didn't have to go after he finished the Corps de Page. He would not have to go into the military and or government, or have that kind of career. And there's one sort of poignant diary entry that Dmitri writes while he's on holiday with his father in the German resort of Tegernsee, and he writes about himself as a genius whom nobody understands, and he's about, I don't know, he's about 16 or 17. And of course, that's all teenagers feel that way. At some point in their existence, they all feel like they're geniuses who nobody understands. And Dmitri was not a genius, but at the same time, he was much smarter than anybody ever acknowledged. So, that was his cross to bear. And it's sad, but it makes sense that he did not want to have anything to do with Bodya. It's too bad. They could have been they could have been quite a team, the two of them. All right, so it's Bodya's birthday. They go to the memorial service. He's willing to do that. I wonder if he would have gone to it if it was just for Bodya and not also for Papa. The little girls are there. Well, they're not so little. By this point, they are young ladies. So Irina is about to turn 20, and Natalia, I think, is 19. And I've talked at such length now about Bodya that I'm not going to have time to talk about them and what they did later in life. I'll have to put that off. And so after that, Dmitri, again, pursuing this kind of aimless existence, he goes to the Travelers, then he walks to the Ritz, he sees his friend the Vichfelds there, then he goes to a dinner party at the Crisavalonis. Leonardi comes. Leonardi is a musician. There are two Leonardis that were active in Paris at that time. The father was a singer, the son was a piano player. I believe this was the singer, and this isn't the only time that they asked him to come. I don't know if he sat down at dinner with them and was included as a guest, or if he was just sort of hired to perform. But anyway, he's there at the party, and Dmitri is just not in the mood for it. He's in the mood for something else. And so he leaves early. He leaves quickly, as he says, and Maria, who perhaps with Sybil had organized this evening, is terribly offended. But, yeah, it is what it is. So he goes to Ciro, which was a very popular, posh restaurant at that time. I found references to it on the internet as a jazz age club. It still exists in Paris, but I don't get the impression that it's quite the glittering place that it used to be. Maybe, I don't know. But if you look it up online, you can find menu art that they had at Ciro, and you can find sketches of the place during its heyday and photographs, and it was a place that Dmitri and his friends hung out. He goes there with Pete Polovtsov, his buddy Pete, and he finds another buddy there, Luders. And it sounds to me like they knew. They didn't just go into Ciro and, hey, there's Bob Luders. We talked about a little bit about him before. But Luders was waiting there, and he just happened to be waiting with 3 girls. So this obviously is something that he had arranged for them for the evening. And these girls are, at best, demi-monde, possibly even 1 or 2 of them, possibly even prostitutes. And my guess would be that some money may have, changed hands that night. So one is Germaine Nieris, the other is Gugu, and the one Dmitri doesn't even know her name. So they go by the Clover Club, somebody named Fisher is performing there that they like or that they know. I don't know. And that name is going to be virtually impossible to find, to track down. The name Fisher would be like a needle in a haystack trying to find anything about him. The Clover Club famously had a gin cocktail that, to this day, if you Google the Clover Club in Paris, you can find recipes or how to make the famous Clover Club gin cocktail. So I've got to try one of those. So the point of the evening is to, have fun with girls. And so they go back to Germain's house, and the rooms astonish Dmitri. He's clearly never been there before. They are in an Indian Chinese style, whatever that means. I wonder if they kind of had a, sort of an opium den feel to them or something like that. Not that Dmitri was doing opium. I've never seen any indication of that at all. But there they are, and what do? Well, they lay around on divans and indulge in all kinds of nonsense. So make of that what you will. It's not Dmitri's usual way of indicating that he has had sex. But on the other hand, when he uses that normal little code of his, it's usually not an occasion like this. It's with a person, one-on-one. So, they are laying on divans and getting up to what they're getting up to. And Dimitri's not having fun. It's an outlet, I guess. It's a sexual outlet or whatever. But it's his take on it the next day is that it was boring and pointless. He's obviously not feeling good about having done it, and it just adds to his depression. And I think I mentioned before that he had the Paris, he was being followed in Paris by people who were police who were keeping track of his activities. And the main thing that they discovered was just that he was, going to brothels and spending time with prostitutes and sometimes bringing them to his hotel room. So maybe that's who these women were. I'm not sure. The word that is left blank, so taken together, talking about the rooms at Germain Neris's house, they resemble a blank. And I can't make out that word. It would be interesting to know. I've tried various variations of it because the letters are pretty clear. There's some of the letters, they could be one or two different letters the way he writes it, but I have just drawn a blank on that one. So we'll have to use our imaginations. So my new system of recapping things in accordance to 3 criteria, the historical value, what we learn new about Dmitri, and also, what was the other one? I'm already done with this system. I didn't feel like it was resonating very well. Interesting people. So now I'm kind of looking at more in the terms of how do I respond to this from the perspective of a historian, if I was writing a nonfiction account of Dimitri's life, and how do I respond to it from the perspective of a novelist. So, from the perspective, to some extent, those two things overlap. I mean, you're not really learning anything about the Russian community in this particular diary entry, but you are learning about life in Jazz Age Paris. Not specifically so much from, it's not going to be from a single diary entry, but when you take the diary entries together, you're learning about life in Paris post-war in the early days of the Jazz Age, just like in the 1906 diary entries. We're getting a snapshot of life in the countryside during the summer in Russia. One that if you read any Russian novels, 19th or early 20th century novels describing life on a country estate in the summer, Oblomov being one of them, you're going to have a little bit of a first-hand account of that you can think back to how Dmitri describes that. And so too with this, you can put it in the broader context of other things you read that talk about Jazz Age Paris. And from a novelist perspective, well, you can see the potential, the thematic, particularly potential for this, not to sort of write smutty scenes with sex, but to talk about this whole theme of the Lishny Chelovek, the superfluous man, and how Dmitri and surely other Russian emigres after the revolution, especially the men, not so much the women, were trying to decide if they even had a future. And in particular, I think from a literary standpoint, this really makes me think of Evelyn Waugh. And he has scenes like this when he's talking about Jazz Age London and his sort of aimless young men and women in his novels. I think particularly of, what is it? I've got to remember the title of that. Gosh, can't believe how my memory is failing me at the moment. Of course, Brideshead Revisited, but there's another one like Nasty Things or something like that about just the aimlessness and the hedonism of life in London after the First World War. And there is a place, that a club that the gentlemen go to, it's not one of their gentlemen's clubs, it's a place of disrepute that they go to, and they meet women like Gugu and this other unnamed woman, and probably Germaine Niris. Her last name is spelled Niris. Dmitri writes it in Latin letters, so I don't know if he spells it correctly. They meet women like that. They have drinks with them in the club, just like this evening that Dmitri is describing. And then, if it becomes clear that the men are not going to give them money and go further, then the women just have to shrug their shoulders and say, well, sorry, I can't spend any more time with you. All right, so that is enough from me. I've gone way too long, but such an interesting diary entry that I couldn't resist. And I'll see you next time. Bye.